Good evening, everyone. We're here for a city council meeting, and it is Monday, August 5, 2019, Rally Week. And I started thinking maybe we should have a tradition where on Rally Week city council meeting we dress up in our black t-shirts and all that kind of stuff. Motion? Okay, we'll start this meeting with a roll call and determination of quorum.
Nordstrom, Modrich, Roberts, Stroman, Armstrong, Lewis, Lehman, Drury, Evans, Drew. We have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. And now we'll have invocation by Angie Myers. And following the invocation, we'll have the Pledge of Allegiance.
Thank you for the opportunity to come pray with you. Can we bow our heads? This time I'd like to just take a brief moment of silence for the victims of the mass shootings that have happened in our nation here recently. Heavenly Father, we thank you. And we come before you today and we lift up the victims of these mass shootings and their families, Father God, and we ask that you comfort them at this time. And Lord, we thank you for our great city, Rapid City, Father, and I thank you for Mayor Steve Ellender and all of these representatives that are making decisions on behalf of our city. Lord, I ask that you give them wisdom and knowledge, Father God, as they make pertinent decisions that would affect many individuals, Lord. We just thank you that you have given us an opportunity to come together. And Father, we just ask that you have a hedge of protection over our city, Rapid City, our great city, the people of Rapid City. Father, we lift our students up to our children as they are getting ready to prepare for another school year. Lord, and we ask a hedge of protection over Sturgis, Raleigh, and all that are coming into our state, that they would just be blessed and enjoy what this great city and state has to offer. We just come before you, Lord, and we ask for a hedge of protection over our nation and our state in this time, Lord. We thank you for coming together. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, for which it stands, one nation, under God. Thank you, everyone. And now this is the point in the meeting where we need to adopt the agenda. The council can make alterations to the agenda or adopt it as written at the moment. Is there a motion to do anything? Motion to adopt by Drury, second by Armstrong. Is there, let's have a vote. Who wants to adopt the agenda? Say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. And now we are going to recognize a couple of long-term employees. It's always a treat to be able to bring attention to the employees who have spent decades on the job doing something day after day, and who do so with such dedication to their, not only to their work group, but to the city and the citizens as well. So let's have first Tracy Davis, the Assistant Finance Director, and we'll have Pauline Sumption, the City Finance Officer, come up here and say a bunch of nice things about her. I can tell you, if you were here just a minute ago, I just presented the budget, and so I talk to these folks here 100 times a year. 90 of them are in the last couple of weeks. So anyway.
I do have the pleasure of honoring Tracy tonight. I will say she started in August of '99, and I started shortly thereafter in December of '99, November of '99 in Sturgis. So although I have not worked with her for the full 20 years, I've known her for almost the full 20 years. So she was a friend before I ever came to work here. She started in Rapid City as the accounting clerk 1, and she has moved her way up to 5 other positions. In that time, she has been instrumental in 2 major software conversions that I'm aware of. There might have been some before I came. I came here in 2007, that a weaker person would have thrown up their hands and quit, and instead she dug in and got the job done. So very dependable. So her other positions were accounting clerk 2, an accounting coordinator. That's what she was when I came to the city in 2007. She was promoted then to the accountant, and then the chief accountant. And then in 2013, my assistant finance officer at the time decided to leave. And we went through the process, and I could not find somebody that I was comfortable with hiring as my second person to fill in when I was gone. So I literally begged her to apply for the job. In the meantime, it went from an appointed position to just a hired position that made her feel more comfortable, and she, thank God, applied for the job, and obviously I gave it to her. So she is my deputy finance officer. I could not do my job without her, and I know most of the employees in Rapid City, for the city, know who Tracy is. They've had interactions with her one way or the other. She has her hands in a lot of little projects, and she gets the job done in a lot of big projects as well. So thank you for your 20 years. I appreciate it. Let's get Bruce and Mom and Dad too. Bruce. Dale, come on. Come on, Mom and Dad. We're waiting for you too.
And next, Larry Dale and the Civic Center Director, Craig Baltzer. Larry Dale is one of those guys, you'll recognize him when you see him up here. Because at every event you've been to in the last 20 years, he's been running around in the lobby and all through the hallways with the radio in his hand, making sure everything's under control. Craig, take it over.
I have to say that 20 years ago, there must have been a heck of a recruiting program in the city, because it seems like we're honoring a lot of people lately, and they're all still here, so that's incredible. One of which is beside me. I'm very honored to be here with Larry. I don't deserve to be here with Larry, but I am here with Larry tonight. Larry has worked at the Civic Center for more than 20 years. Half that career, he was our food and beverage manager and got that running on the straight and narrow. The other half, he's been moved into an area of high responsibility, event services and life safety at the Civic Center. Larry is probably best known to all our guests and our clients, and certainly the staff at the Civic Center, of having excellent guest service. He does it with kind of a quirky personality and a bizarre sense of humor. Leaves everybody smiling, I guarantee it. And a good example of that is every year we do the stock show and rodeo at the Civic Center, and we have that place called the Cowboy Bar. Now the Cowboy Bar operates a little bit like a regular bar. And at the end of the night, you got to close it down and you got to kick everybody out. Now they've been drinking, they've been having a good time, and now you have to tell them to leave. A regular bar will use beef. They'll use a muscular bouncer type of guy to intimidate people and get them out. We don't need to do that. We have a Larry. Larry gets up there, gets on the microphone, and starts singing, ironically and very badly. Clears the room really fast, but everybody leaves laughing. And that is something you can't train or teach. That's something that Larry has. And it's been a lot of fun just in the years that I've been here to work with Larry. I do want to mention a couple achievements of Larry that are a little more serious. The staff at the Civic Center would not forgive me if I didn't mention on how well Larry handled the 40th anniversary of the flood in 2012 event. It was a big event. It was a sensitive event. A lot of people were involved. City leadership, past city leaderships, a tremendous amount of people. Larry handled it pretty much by himself and did a tremendous job. That's a hard event to run, and he did a great job, and the staff wanted me to let you know that. Something else that I noticed, who was it? Hang on, excuse me, I have to look at my notes. Up until here, I was doing well. Oh yeah, it was a couple years ago, Bernie Sanders was running for president, and he came to our town. He didn't even show up at the Civic Center. He was playing the park in front of the Civic Center. We didn't think we were going to have anything to do with that event. So when they called and said, we need a contact name, we gave them Larry and said, Larry, just see what they need and if we can help with anything. Well, it ended up, after Larry started talking with them, we were handling all the services for that. I can tell you, as a person who's handled those kind of events in the past, security detail for somebody running for president is quite serious, and it is quite a task to handle. And Larry handled all that, and we didn't even know that he was doing everything and that the Civic Center was providing so much service there. He did a tremendous job. The job went out of the hitch. I got a letter from whoever in the federal government telling me what a great job he did and all that kind of stuff, so there's another one. And one other, and again, there's millions, but I do want to, on the life safety side, Larry's doing a ton of things. He's working in the police department, he's working with the fire department, he's working with EMTs constantly, putting all that together and making it safe for our audiences at the Civic Center. He trains us in CPR. We just had CPR training just a few weeks ago to make sure we had a refresher course to make sure we all knew what we were doing, because we want to be a safe atmosphere. And that's Larry that's putting all that together. One of the things in that category, it came up real sudden in our business to be forced to use magnetometers, metal detectors, the walk-through kind. They're very expensive, and we didn't have a budget set aside for it because it came up very quickly. Larry helped get a grant from Homeland Security of South Dakota, secured half the money. The other half of the money, we found a way to swing it ourselves. Larry did a tremendous amount of research with other facilities that already had them to find out how to operate them and how to policies and make it work. Every building had a tragic story the first time they used theirs. And our first event, our first big event, was Luke Bryant last year, and it went off without a hitch. And that's the kind of service that Larry's provided for years. I just want to thank him, and I appreciate you working with me, because I'm difficult. And I hope you stick around for a while longer. Thank you, Larry.
Not going to add much to that. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Item 2 on the agenda, we're going to have a presentation from Central States Fair, Director Ron Jeffries.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Madam Chair, and members of the council. I know you've been here a long time, and I will be remarkably brief tonight. First of all, in the roar of the Sturgis Rally, we are in the midst of planning the Central States Fair. It'll join us here in Rapid City starting the 16th. So 5 days after the rally's over, they'll wash tents and clean off pop coolers and everything else and bring them down to the fairgrounds, and we'll reset everything up and be ready to roll. But I wanted to extend a couple of invitations to the members of the council. And first off, at 3 o'clock on Friday the 16th, we're having our ribbon cutting. And it's our official kickoff of the Central States Fair. If your schedule permits, we'd like you to join us at that time. And then again on Tuesday, we have the Chamber Mixer. It's sponsored by Fisher Beverage, and Robert Sharp and Associates, celebrating their 30th year in business, have joined with us to celebrate the Chamber Mixer at the Coors Tent during the Central States Fair. And then the last item that I wanted to mention to you is we are so fortunate to have been able to land a new event at this year's fair. The PRCA Rodeo a number of years ago started hosting what they called extreme bull events. It's where there's not a full rodeo, it's just the bull riding event. And a year ago, the person that won the bull riding for the entire WNFR won $100,000 more than the person that won the saddle bronc match, traveling to the same number of rodeos. So we went to the PRCA with an idea to create a finals for the saddle bronc, extreme saddle bronc. And they developed a tour. The PRCA developed a tour. There's, I think, 16 stops in that tour. And the finals for the entire tour and $50,000 prize money is going to be held at the Central States Fair on Thursday night during the middle of the Range Days Rodeo. So we have a Range Days Rodeo on Wednesday. We have the PRCA Extreme Broncs on Thursday. And then we have 2 more nights of rodeo. That'll be televised on CBS Sports. We're very excited about it. It should be a big thing. It will be the single biggest day in rodeo in anywhere, because we're going to have the top 24 saddle bronc riders. Now, if you went to the NFR, you'd see the top 15. But we're going to bring the top 24 to this event. So it'll mean the top 15 that'll qualify for the NFR, and those positions will be determined out of the 24, most likely out of the 24 that will be in Rapid City on the 22nd. I provided a schedule of events for you. If you have questions, please call us. John Roberts is our representative here from the board. We appreciate him joining. I will mention that this is not John's first rodeo. John has been volunteering with North Rapid Civic Association for about 25 years, John? About half that? But he's been down there joining the North Rapid Civic Association as part of our ticket takers and ushers each year at the fair. So we appreciate his service, and now we're glad to have him on our board. With that, as I mentioned, I will be brief. I just want to invite you to the 74th Central States Fair, August 16th through the 25th. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, this is the time for general public comment. There are some speaker request forms, but they're attached to specific items, so we won't handle them at this point. It'll be just in a minute. So we'll have no general public comment. Non-public hearing items, items 3 through 51. We'll open public comment on items 3 through 40. And we have one speaker request for those items, and that's Gene Kesloff speaking on item 31.
Hi, my name is Jean Kesloff, and I'm president of Historic Rapid City. I would like to speak to item 31, the donation of land at Skyline Drive. Although they are not here, I would like to thank the Seversons for their donation of land to the preservation of Skyline Drive. Because of their generosity and the people before them and the continuous efforts of the Skyline Drive Preservation, Inc., we have this unique area in our city. When it comes to preservation, you're not supposed to use the term unique. Everything's unique, but it is unique. It's unique to us, and we are extremely lucky to have it and its history. Thank you.
Thank you. And that'll conclude the public comment period for items 3 through 40. And now on to consent items 3 through 40. Would the council like to remove any of these items from consent? We'll go to Pauline Sumption.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I know I'm not council, but I need to have 24 removed.
Okay, are there any items from the council that they would like removed from consent? Or otherwise, would we have a motion to approve? Okay, motion to approve by Lewis and a second by Armstrong to approve. Yeah, the items 3 through 40 with the exception of 24. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. And we'll go to item 24, which is to approve resolution number 2019-060, a resolution levying assessment for abatement of nuisances. And we'll go to Pauline Sumption.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We need to remove the assessment for Scott and Bridget Henriksen as they were in today and paid that. It's in the amount of $222.
Okay, would there be a motion to approve this item with the exception of Scott Henriksen and Mrs. Henriksen? Who made a motion? John Roberts, and a second was Lisa Modrich. All in favor of that motion, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. And that takes us through consent. On to non-consent items 41 through 51. We're going to open public comment on these items, and we have a few speaker requests. And we'll start first on item number 42, and we're going to start with Nancy. Is there Nancy? And Nancy, could you pronounce your last name for us and tell us where you're from, please?
My name is Nancy Hilding, Hilding, like running, jumping, swimming, ing ending. And I'm president of Prairie Hills Audubon Society. I'm speaking on behalf of the society, and the address for the society is P.O. Box 788, Black Hawk, South Dakota, 57718. And that's an environmental nonprofit group whose jurisdiction is most of western South Dakota. We're a chapter of the National Audubon Society. And I know the ordinance or rule or whatever you call it has many points, and we are just concerned about the one point that authorizes the bow hunting, the special bow hunting time period. There's other parts of it that are not relevant to that. And then there's a resolution about bow hunting, and we're objecting to the addition of bow hunting. We were around in 1994, 1995, 1996 when the whole issue of hunting and killing Rapid City deer came up. That was highly controversial. There was an initiated measure, there was litigation, there were all these committees that met, there were people that didn't want any deer killed, there were people that wanted you to use contraceptives on the deer, there were people who wanted the deers killed, different theories about how they were to be killed and where they were to be killed, and concern for safety of the people near weapons. There was concern for humane treatment of the animals. So at any rate, you came in the end to what was a compromise. Not everybody was happy on all sides, but that was 1996, and that has been sitting around for, 23 and a half years as a compromise. So now someone wants to come forward and bring on the hunting with arrows, which will raise, I believe, liability concerns for the city. It will raise public safety issues for the possibility of people being hurt, and also raise animal welfare concerns with respect to the deers. What you have now is staff of the city who have to be tested and I think have some sort of review of their, I don't know what it's called, looking at their past. And they go out there at night and they shoot the deer, and they've been proven that they can hit what they aim at. And the hunters, Black Hills Sportsman figures out a way to donate, get the animals butchered and the carcasses be donated to the poor to eat. It has been working for 23 years. Okay, now the issue that you have now is you are going to be letting people who are not trained, who have to pass a test of hitting a a 4-inch radius spot from about 90 feet away. They have to pass that test, but there's some sort of lottery or ability to apply, and then if they get awarded it, they have to go pass a test, and then they can come out to 3 spots. 2 of those spots are the sites that the Rapid City baits and the professional hunters go to, and 1 site is at Game Fish and Parks, which is not one of the sites that you bait. And so these will be non-professional hunters, and they will be using arrows instead of rifle bullets. We sent it to you by email, a quote that shows that in a statistics taken in Texas, that half the time bow hunters need to shoot 2 deers to catch 1 deer because the 1 deer that they hit wanders off, wounded, to die elsewhere, but they don't catch. Okay, now the hunters miss 7% of the time instead of half of the percent of the time.
Nancy?
Yeah?
I apologize. I should have mentioned when you started, we have 3 minutes apiece for public comment, and
Beyond that.
your time's up, so maybe you could just wrap
All
up.
right, okay. Hunting by arrows is not as effective as hunting by bullets, and you're going to have non-professionals doing this. You also should be aware in South Dakota there's a mentored hunting program and the apprentice hunting program. The mentored hunting program, would allow a 1-day-old child to hunt in the presence of an adult. The apprentice allows kids from, I think, 12 to 18 to hunt by themselves. If you do go forward with this, you should be limiting the hunting to adults at the very least. But you should be looking at all the different hunting programs and who can hunt, and looking at mistakes made with arrows. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hilding. The next person that we have is Julie Anderson. Can you please come on item 42? Could you please come up? And just to note, we have a 3-minute time limit. Thank you.
My name is Julie Anderson, and I live in Rapid City. And I sat in a city council meeting in 1995, and many since, opposing the city's urban deer management program. I thought then, excuse me, and still do, that there are ways to live with wildlife, and we should exhaust every humane method available to us before using lethal means. 23 years later, we are still making taxpayers pay to kill these animals annually without any implementation of non-lethal means. Now the city and the Game Fish Parks Department wants to allow bow hunters to participate. This proposed agreement between the city and the Game Fish and Parks up for vote today was negotiated without the input of the public. Also, the Rapid City Journal published this event as a headline less than a week ago, printed contact information on how bow hunters could obtain a license, and endorsed the program in its editorial page. I propose to you that the Game Fish and Parks Department is abusing its power, as it has consistently ignored the public's wishes for non-lethal methods of control, and now wants to cater to its bow hunting membership by amending a city ordinance. Bow hunting is especially cruel, with wound rates totaling over 50%. From my experience in participating in this program over the years, the one thing never addressed is how much the animals suffer. Arrows are highly unreliable projectiles. Over half the deer shot will not die instantly. Instead, they will escape and die slowly, excuse me, from infections. This was from a study taken from a program where participants passed an archery test. When will this ever be a consideration? Saving money is the main argument for this program, but there will be additional costs to factor in when a resident reports a wounded deer and someone has to go out and shoot it. Liability is also an issue. As a taxpayer, I would like to see the city reevaluate the expenditure controlling urban deer to include planting deer-friendly vegetation outside the city limits to discourage deer from coming into town in search of food, building a deer crossing in an area of the city that has the biggest collision rate. Wyoming is building a crossing on one of their roads for migrating animals, and I propose one be built on a much smaller scale here. posting more signs and lowering the speed limit in areas where deer collisions are frequent so people are aware, allocating a percentage of this current budget to allow people to purchase fencing to protect their gardens. I feel the time has come to learn to live with wildlife and teach our children through examples to do the same. You have the power. Please don't amend the current ordinance that prohibits bow and arrow use in town. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we have Trenton Hathi, representing the South Dakota Game and Fish and Parks.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Madam Chairman, members of the council. My name is Trenton Hathi. I'm with Game, Fish, and Parks. Tonight I'm talking on behalf of the ordinance modification regarding changing the ordinance for throwing stones and missiles. As stated before, the modification of this ordinance will allow for the discharge of archery weapons in select areas within city limits. This ordinance modification is a precursor to the proposal that you guys have seen that will allow or initiate a controlled archery antlerless hunt in select areas within the city limits of Rapid City. These conversations regarding this archery proposal and this ordinance modification are just a culmination of discussions had between Game, Fish, and Parks and Rapid City Parks and Rec Department for the last several years. I'd like to say that Rapid City is an innovator or leader in this department, but in fact, there are at least 44 other communities in North Dakota, Minnesota, and Iowa that have very similar programs to remove deer within city limits. Some of those communities include Duluth, Mankato, and Redwood Falls, Minnesota, Fargo and Bismarck, North Dakota, Dubuque, Iowa, and Sioux Falls, South Dakota, so certainly not small communities. What we were able to do is model this proposal after other proposals that these cities have already gone through. They've gone through the trials and tribulations of what it takes to have a successful and safe, controlled deer removal program. We modeled this proposal after others to create a controlled hunting opportunity that's beneficial to both the city and Game, Fish, and Parks. Thank you.
Thank you. And now on the same item, Jeff Olson.
Thank you. I got my form in a little late. Sorry about that. I'm Jeff Olson with the South Dakota Sportsman Against Hunger program. And I first want to thank the council in Rapid City for working so close with our program. Last year, the City Deer provided over 30,000 meals to those in need in our area here. We work with the Feeding South Dakota to distribute the meat, so it's a win-win. I do want to make a few clarifications on some of the journal calls, right, because they weren't really accurate. Hunters have not been part of the deer harvest program in Rapid City, but sportsmen have been part in the funding of the program. So last year, we pledged $10,000 to help pay for the processing of the city deer. They didn't quite get the number they wanted, so we pitched in $7,200 on top of the $46,000 that the program costs. I don't know why the journal said 30, but roughly it comes out to about $234 a deer to harvest these deer and process them and get them to those in need. So it's an expensive program. And obviously sportsmen pay the money in, but they also want to be part of the process, and this is why this is a good program, why it works in other communities. It's safe, it gets the hunter involved, the proficiency test will be fine, and it will save money, lots of money, if it's successful. So I think, obviously, I represent the Black Hills Sportsman's Club also, so we're here to support the program and the ordinance change. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And then on item 43, Tangi Weaver.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm here tonight speaking to you for South Dakota Citizens for Liberty and for myself as well. I want to thank you for looking for ways to be fiscally prudent, but on item 43, we respectfully disagree. We believe that one thing government should expend resources on is making the voice of the governed heard. And I read the story in the newspaper and watched it on television, I believe. They talked about in the last 10 years, the outcome hasn't been changed by a runoff election. But I'm old enough to remember in Ward 5 two elections that were affected by a runoff. The winner of the plurality lost the runoff. So just because it hasn't happened in the last 10 years, that's a pretty narrow window over history, is no good reason to eliminate that process. Elections are legitimate expenses. I had a conversation the other day at the county office with a friend from what I would say is the other side of the aisle, and we talked about this, and even though we agreed that we would probably disagree on who should win a runoff, we still agreed that we should have them. I want to point out that this kind of sends a mixed message. After an election, everybody, and especially those who are just elected, usually admonish the electorate for staying home and not coming out. They criticize the low numbers that, sometimes do happen. But this sends a message that, yeah, we want you to vote, just not too much. So I would ask you to reconsider that and to please realize that even though sometimes the outcome doesn't change, it's still the voice of the governed. Representative government depends on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And that takes us through our speaker requests. So we'll close the public comment, and then we'll start on ordinances on item 41. Item 41, second reading ordinance 6345, an ordinance to repeal the Compass Internal Audit Program by repealing Chapter 2.95 of the Rapid City Municipal Code. Motion to approve by Lewis, second by Modrich. All in favor of that motion say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Item 42, first reading ordinance 6347, an ordinance to amend section 9.28.020 of the Rapid City Municipal Code relating to throwing stones and missiles. And for the benefit of the audience, this is an ordinance that prohibits throwing or shooting anything within the city limits. There has been a proposal from the Game, Fish, and Parks and Sportsmen Against Hunger to open up some forested areas of Rapid City for archery hunting. And in order to do that, this ordinance would have to be amended. So that's the backstory on it, and we'll go to Lisa Modrich.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate that Nancy as well as Julie had come forward with a little bit of the 1990s history, and that was something that I'd been digging for as myself. And the bow and arrow has been a very important tool for hunting meat that goes back to the beginning of time, but obviously there was a time in our community where it was not the right source to use for our urban population of deer, and I have to think eventually it will be turkey as well, but I know we're concentrating on the deer side. In my research as well, I understand that the arrow in an animal can be inhumane. It does create a problem of welfare and what happens to that animal if it does, in fact, move on with that injury, and it would be a substantial injury. I had one person describe it who was an actual hunter who said the guts come out and the deer's in the neighborhood, and that's it's a pretty rough visual, and I guess that's pretty real as well. Our sharpshooter program has worked well. I've heard the mayor compliment it and say that it's getting the job done, and so much so that sometimes we may even be able to look at the budgeting on it because it might be working so well we may not have to always put that kind of money in our sharpshooters. But where does the bow and arrow really come in? It's not this program that's being introduced, and I respect South Dakota Game, Fish, and Parks for doing so. I think it could create a new sport, but it's a sport that I want to see that as, not as a removal of our animals and in our neighborhoods. And then what is it really teaching our young ones if we're opening this up to to be able to bow and arrow, and where do we go with our code enforcements, and what are we going to do as far as following some of that when there's somebody that's reporting that that somebody thinks that they've got the permit and they're running around with a bow and arrow. I have too many concerns to say that this is something that I can vote on. I don't think we've addressed it. It sounds like a great idea on paper, but if in fact it had an initiated measure on it in the 90s, why are we not looking at that movement that was happening by our community then? It wasn't that long ago, and I have to think that the results would be the same. And that leadership and that council said no then, and I have to say no now. Thank you.
Bill Evans.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Ms. Modrich, because I completely agree with everything you said. I would like to add that I don't know exactly what logic was used when this was recommended for approval, but I see the deer harvesting as a housekeeping thing that's necessary, and it's been very efficient. I think this proposal to introduce bow hunting is less efficient, which is never the way you want to move in terms of city efficiency. Now, I was teaching very nearby the Montessori school when the moose was, you know, unceremoniously removed in front of with kids watching through the picture window, and it really traumatized a lot of children. And I know that it's possible, as a person who gets up in the morning and sees anywhere from 5 to 10 deer nesting under a tree in their yard, to walk out, and if I had an arrow, I could probably shoot one. Sort of like shooting fish in a barrel. I don't see anything sportsmanlike about it, to be honest with you, because these deer have become so used to people around them, so I don't see it as a very sportsmanlike thing. And the last thing I'd like to see happen is a deer running through somebody's backyard with an arrow through its neck and a child observing this. So I think it's a very destructive idea, and I'm going to oppose it. Thank you.
Darla Drew.
Thank you, Mayor. This is tough, because I don't know if there's a humane way to kill an animal, but I think that I'd rather see safety for humans come first, and that is my main concern. We do have a lot of deer in our neighborhoods. I have them in my yard every morning, and I think they're beautiful. But I do think they're a danger for collisions and, of course, the damage they do to homes. Now, that might not be important enough to take their lives, but I do think that we have to have some responsibility here in this decision as to how we want to have a safe community. We have increased the number of archers. We've got game fishing parks with a lot of programs they're doing now. Certainly, I've worked in the Lakota community, and to them, archery is a very important sport. L&I, it's growing significantly. And I think with some real care on how we license this, I think we can make sure that these deer aren't going around with an arrow through their neck, and that we get really qualified people that can go and take care of this harvest. And I know harvest is a word for killing. I know that. And I know that a lot of people find that offensive. But in this case, in our city, we have deer, I know, and they are not just in the west side of town. South, east, north, they're everywhere. And my concern is for the humans. I love the deer, but humans have to come first. And so if we have to eliminate more deer than our regular quota, we can do it without extra expense and actually provide an activity for people that are bow hunters and that are qualified and are adults. I like that as well. I liked that when they brought that up. So I'm going to vote yes for this because I frankly think that the deer in our community are not going to go out and eat vegetation out in the hills. They're here, and they're going to stay here. That genie left the bottle a long time ago. They're going to be here, and they're going to be in town, and they'll be a detriment to our drivers and to our safety. Thank you.
Chad Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If I could please ask a question, Mr. Trenton. Is it Haverly? Hathi, excuse me.
Trenton Hathi, would you mind coming to the podium for a question?
Is it Trent? Or Trent, okay. It's a quick question for you. It's not too complex, hopefully, but could you please just give us the idea of the motivation behind this, bringing this forth now?
So this has actually been several years in the making.
I mean, okay.
Yep. And just through the process, this was, whether it came 5 years ago or this year, this was just, we finally found the avenue and the proper channels to bring it before the city council.
Okay. Well, I could say, in my personal opinion, I love cats, but I don't like the big ones. And it seems like they're getting closer to the community more as the deer population increases. I know that we do a yearly harvest, and that money, the taking there is given to the hunger. Excuse me, what was the organization again? I forget.
Sportsmen
for Hunger. Thank you.
Dakota, yep.
And it's obviously a very worthy cause, but I also think we're talking about 22 or 20, is it, licenses? Is that correct?
Yeah, with the current proposal, it would be 21 licenses.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, I mean, folks, you live in South Dakota. I remember there's probably 25 fishermen sitting around here and hunters as well. I don't bow hunt myself, but I do know the bow hunters I know are pretty crazy, and they're pretty responsible, and they know what they're doing. They don't just walk up there with a bow and start shooting things. I mean, they obviously have a passion for it. It's a very, original form of hunting, obviously, and they're very disciplined people. They have to wait a long time to get those shots, and they don't just start. And arrows cost a lot of money. And it's something that's not just a willy-nilly thing. And I think that is there going to be a vetting these hunters as well?
Yeah, correct. They will certify at the outdoor campus with it's a 30-yard shot or 30-yard proficiency test. They have to place, I believe it's 3 of 3 arrows in an 8-inch circle at 30 yards.
And like I said, there's no way to make anything completely safe. But I do realize that. I mean, I have 3 children of my own, and I try not to shelter them from anything. I mean, if they see a deer get shot, hey, that's part of the cycle of life. I appreciate that you're obviously a little more sensitive to that, sir, but I think that we live in South Dakota. A lot of hunters here. It's just a kind of natural progression. I'm kind of surprised we haven't done this before. I'm not saying we should run around shooting everything that moves, but this is done during a season. It's not just all day, all the time. It's going to be well regulated, and I just fully support it. I don't think, and we're not talking about a huge number of deer anyway or hunters, but just another opportunity to get out there and, if nothing else, just to explore the community, not the community, but the culture of South Dakota. So I will be supporting it. Thank you.
Trent, I have a quick follow-up on Mr. Lewis' question. What's the intent of the program? Is it urban deer reduction? Is it conservation? Is it hunting? What's the purpose? What's your interest in this?
Any and all of the above. It's certainly probably never going to replace the deer removal program that you have now. It could certainly take away a part of that. But it is an opportunity. The sportsmen are contributing a major financial portion of that budget right now to participate, to create the deer removal program we currently have. This just allows them an opportunity to participate.
Okay, thank you. John Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Trent, if you want to stay there for just 1 minute. Sorry about that. And then Mr. Beegler, I'm going to have a question for you too. I really appreciate you bringing this forward. 7 or 8 years ago, when I was on the Park and Rec Board, we had started discussing this. And I do appreciate the fact that you're allowing some of these hunters to be able to draw another license. Because I know a lot of people that bow hunt, and when they have the opportunity to do it, again, and I guess that's a question that I'm going to bring in is how are you going to draw for these licenses? Are they going to be extra licenses on top of what's already in this area, or is this going to be a special license through the Game Fish and Parks?
So the way the state regulates the antlerless archery licenses right now is every archer is allowed 1, and that's valid in select units statewide. And it just so happens actually that Rapid City falls within the boundaries of one of those units. So it's kind of neat and tidy for us that way. We're modeling it basically after what Sioux Falls does, and they just use that normal, we call it an LM-113 license. It's an antlerless whitetail license.
And can you tell me how long Sioux Falls had this in
7 years.
Because I know it was about this time we started looking at it then that Sioux Falls was bringing it forward. So how many other cities in South Dakota? Are there any other cities?
Nope, it's just Sioux Falls currently.
Okay, well, most of the other ones are small enough they just do it anyway. But Anyway, if I can speak to Mr. Bigler right now. Thank you. So Jeff, when this came forward the first time, well, maybe not the first time I saw it, 7, 8 years ago, I think it was before you were actually even here, and we started discussing it. I thought it was a great idea then. I think it's a great idea now. I would like to see a little more than 21 licenses, but that's just me personally. I think it gives a lot of opportunity to hunters, you know, in Rapid City area, and you know, like the mayor said, I think, or like someone said, it gives the sportsmen an opportunity to participate, because I know that's part of what we heard 7, 8 years ago when we started discussing this was, you know, we've got 2 or 3 people that are out there shooting all these deer, and there are other people that would like to have the opportunity to do it. And, you know, I just think it's a great idea. I think anytime we can save money and anytime we can bring people in to do something that they love doing, and the majority of these people are going to be highly qualified. If they're not, they'll get the training through Game Fish and Parks. And I think it's just a win-win for Rapid City. So I just wanted to applaud you, Jeff, and I support this wholeheartedly. Thank you.
Becky Drury.
Thank you, Mayor. I also have a question for Trent, if you wouldn't mind. And Trent actually called my house, and I did speak to him briefly on the proposal. And one of the things that I see for Rapid City is we do have an abundance of deer, and this is a way to control the population. Stop me if I'm saying something that's not within the purview of why you want to go there. And your people that are going to be shooting the deer are trained. We would call them like sharpshooters. There is always a chance for a misplaced arrow. What happens at that point in time?
So one of the requirements that we placed in that proposal was that they have to identify each of the arrows that they're taking into the field. So if a wayward arrow is discovered somewhere else, or a deer happens to be hit and is run off, there's a good chance that we'll be able to figure out who it was. Ideally, what it does is, prior to that arrow even being released, it causes that bow hunter to think even a little bit more than they already do about releasing that arrow, because there's an additional chance that there's going to be some consequence, or potentially some consequences, if that arrow is discovered.
Right, and I mean, my husband's a hunter, and I would describe him as stealthy. I mean, he can get so close that he can't shoot when he hunts. So I'm not worried about it, but I know that when these people do go out and shoot, they will not only try to do their best to have it a one-shot wonder, but if they miss or something goes awry, they will track them down, take care of the problem, and it's not going to be like Bambi running through somebody's yard with a mad hunter going after them.
Right, and within that proposal, we do outline the 3 specific hunt areas. Hunters would not be allowed to leave that vicinity. So if a deer unfortunately would go outside of that, they have to work through Game Fish and Parks and through the Rapid City Police Department to make sure that they're doing everything that they should be to recover that deer.
Yeah. And it can't be any more horrible than some of the deer that I've seen smucked on the side of the road. I mean, I came down Mount Rushmore Road last year, and there was a deer that had been hit. Its hip was broken, one antler was gone, and it was hobbling across the street. I mean, if you want to take into consideration of a tragic and also gruesome sight, that was, and I've seen a lot of hunting, been around it my entire life. That was one of the worst things I had ever seen, and that was a car that did that, not a hunter. So I'm in favor of the program. We need to reduce the population of the deer in town. I've had deer take after my granddaughter in her yard and chase her. She was 4. I mean, it's scary. It's scary stuff. So I can't shoo them out of my yard. I can get from my close as I am right now to the city attorney before they will even think about moving. And I mean, when I'm out there and I'm a mad woman trying to yell and scream to get them to move, and there's just too many. So I appreciate the program. I yield.
Laura Armstrong.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. May I direct a couple questions to Mr. Biegler?
Yes.
Mr. Biegler, thank you. I involved you in part of a email discussion that I had. I would like to get on the other side of the fence and maybe talk about some proposed non-lethal ways that we can address this. Has that even been explored?
Not recently, no. When the deer management plan does detail, the first discussion was for some non-lethal methods, as was being described earlier, trapping or removing and relocating, and those proved not to be very realistic, probably, and cost-effective, and so they were not even implemented.
Is it something that maybe we can research regardless of how this vote goes? Maybe just looking, we're always looking for options, I think. And
yeah, absolutely.
We're never going to please everybody, but if there are other ways, like as wild game bridges, you know, I know my ward mate, Mrs. Drew, said the genie's out of the bottle per se. I get it. She has a valid statement. But just, I think it would make me feel a little bit better, as well as the other people that are against this ordinance, to maybe just continue to explore some other possible ways that we can address this program, because we're getting more people, obviously, coming into our town, and the Game Fish and Parks, of course, does a great job, but I would feel better if we could just research that.
We can certainly do that. We do have an urban wildlife committee that operates under our Parks and Recreation Department, and we can certainly bring that up with that group.
That would be wonderful. Thank you so much. I yield.
Chad Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to make a motion to approve. Could we hold the floor? Thank you. Just once again.
Second by Roberts, and go ahead. Mr.
Sorry,
Lewis.
just once again reiterating my support for this. You know, the wildlife bridges are great for, like, I think, highways. I don't know how you'd implement one in a city. I think it'd be quite difficult to figure that out and to implement it. And I mean, I appreciate the ideas, obviously, but I think they're great on a highway. I've seen the ones on the internet, whatever, seem like they work really well. I'm not sure that would work here, but I'm sure this has been vetted quite strongly. Anybody who knows the government agencies, they don't move quickly, and they kind of study things to the pieces, which drives the public crazy, but they're actually doing their due diligence. So this wasn't something that was put together nilly-willy. And I'm sure the idea of arming, you know, 20 people running around with bow and arrows isn't something that they're just going to throw out there. So I'm sure a lot of things have been considered and will be considered going forward. And I think it's just going to be a win-win. Like I said, it allows the sportsmen to participate in the harvest, and hopefully, you know, creates a few less deer collisions, I guess, because I've got a truck. It's got a nice grill drilled in right now. And that was in Montana, but still. But either way, I appreciate your work, gentlemen, and thank you for bringing this forward.
Okay, the motion on the floor is for approval, and we'll go to a roll call vote, please.
Lewis. Drury. Evans. Drew. Nordstrom. Modrich. Roberts. Stroman. Armstrong. Motion passes 6-3.
Okay, thank you. On to item 43, first reading ordinance 6352, an ordinance removing the requirement to have a runoff election for municipal offices by repealing section 1.16.030 of the Rapid City Municipal Code. And again, for the benefit of the audience who may not have picked up on it already, this is there is a enabling legislation on the state level that allows cities to elect officials at less than 50% of the vote in a multiple candidate race. Rapid City has had a runoff requirement for a number of years. Maybe the city attorney will chime in. But this ordinance would it would change the requirement for a runoff election in a multi-candidate election. And I think the council has they can disapprove the proposal. That's one option. The other two options are they can approve it with the highest vote getter wins, or they can set a minimum number of votes rather than the current 50%. So we'll go to Chad Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to make a motion to approve and retain the floor if I could. If I can get a second.
Second by Darla Drew. Go ahead.
Thank you, sir. I'll be having a question for the city attorney here in just a second. Just want to preface it by saying I appreciate the efforts behind this. I understand. Besides the cost savings, it's also just I mean, I know how hard elections are, and it's, you know, it's more, we as a council are trying to get ready for the next council, and we have to wait like another 3 weeks or so, which I realize is minor inconvenience when you think of the big picture, but still to make sure everybody's informed what's going on, so the earlier they can get into the process, the better. But I also would say, before we start setting and tinkering our own personal ideas about what the percentages should be, that's all they are, basically, their opinions. And none of us are election experts, at least not that I know of. And to say, well, 34% is right, or 42%, or whatever, I mean, it's completely pulling a number out of hat as far as I'm concerned. So I think just going with what state law says at this point is the proper thing to do and the fairest thing to do. I think that, you know, it's just to keep running and running and running. You know, you could change it, but less people are going to vote. I mean, Mr. Stroman, for instance, had 893 people in the first election, and he had 600 and what's the number again? Lost him. Sorry, 607 the next. I mean, some people just don't show up to vote. Obviously, 800 of those people really want, 900 people want him to win, and some of them just didn't show up to vote the second time. So I think, you know, you might actually be hurting the will of the people by continuing to draw this out. But that's my own personal opinion. So, quick question for Joel and Ian, if you could give us a little further explanation about this. As what the mayor was talking about, I appreciate it.
Sure. Prior to 2009, state law mandated that to win a municipal office, you had to get 50% plus one of the vote. In 2009, state legislature amended the statute, and the default now is that the person who receives the most votes in the initial election wins. Now, state law did allow cities to adopt an ordinance that required a runoff and required a 50+1. So Rapid City did that in 2009. When I gave you the history, I talked about the last 10 years since the ordinance was adopted, and we chose to do runoffs, and it has not changed the election. There's a little bit of history, and I think it was brought up at the Legal and Finance Committee. Probably the most prominent election where a runoff was done and it did change the result was the 2007 mayoral election, in which Sam Quaker was the highest vote getter in the initial election, and then Alan Hanks was the winner in the runoff. Interesting historically, not only because of that, but because Alan Hanks was the mayor in 2009 when state law was changed. And while I never spoke with Alan about it directly, I have a feeling that Alan had a pretty strong feeling about runoff elections after his experience, which is probably why Rapid City chose to adopt an ordinance which required a runoff. But the default under state law is that there is no runoff now. So, you know, while we can have a philosophical argument about the merits of a runoff election, I think, you know, when we discussed bringing this forward, I think you have to also look at the practical side of it. And the practical side of it is in 10 years, there have been a number of runoff elections, and in the last 10 years, not a single one has changed. And it has, ultimately, I don't think we have a total because each election is different, but costs the city hundreds of thousands of dollars in runoff elections. So the question is how much the philosophical feelings or belief that we should let the voters decide, and that if you're going to sit up here, you should get 50+1% of the vote. You know, that's really up to you guys. However, if you think about it, the amount of registered voters who vote is already less than a majority, so you're already being selected by less than a majority of the people or the eligible voters. So does it really make a difference at that point? That, again, is up to you.
Thank you, Mr. Landine. I agree with him wholeheartedly. I think that it's just once again, it's an arbitrary number, and I think that more people probably vote for you the first time around, and then you get this, the percentage might be higher the next time, but you still have less people voting, so I don't think it's relevant. I think it's just best that and it saves money, and you know, we get lambasted all the time for not saving money up here, and I realize it's an important thing that we're talking about elections. Mr. Weaver, I completely agree with you. However, it doesn't seem like it's changing anything, and I just would rather save the money and move on. So thank you.
Laura Armstrong.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to address Mrs. Weaver's comments about not getting, democracy is not working, or you had said something to that effect of, I think what you're just concerned of is not that many people are going to be voting. And I think it's something that we're all concerned about. Whether we're running or not, I think we all have a duty to encourage people to vote. And regardless of what side of the aisle we're on, we want everybody to vote as much as we, to vote when they can. And I think the city and the county do an excellent job. We have early voting, we've got the mail-in voting, and then of course we have election day. So I think we all have a duty to encourage people to vote, and this is it. Eliminating the runoff, this is, you need to vote, and I'm behind that. Whether you're doing it early or the day of, or you're mailing it in. Another thing that I wanted to address, if I may, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Lundin, I had some constituents ask me about instant voting runoff. Are you familiar with that? Where it's the ranking. I had a few constituents mention, why didn't we do the IVF? Or I'm sorry, that's fertilization, IVR.
I think that's beyond our scope.
Right.
I've heard about that once, and I mean, that's pretty unique. I doubt there's too many places in the U.S. that do that. In fact, I think when I heard about it, it was something that was done in a foreign country where you ranked the person that you wanted based on
I was not familiar with it either until I was approached.
I'm not aware of anybody that does it. In South Dakota, I think the simple answer is that state law doesn't authorize that, and we are not a home rule municipality, so I don't think we have the authority to do that. What state law says is that the person who gets the majority of votes is the winner, unless the city adopts an ordinance requiring a runoff to make it the 50+1. And so I think that's kind of, unless we want to become a home rule, that's the extent of our authority.
So basically, we just wanted to be in alignment with the state, and I think that's something that our constituents would possibly like. And I apologize if I butchered what you said, Mrs. Weaver, but I think what we want is we want people to vote, correct? Correct. Yes, okay, thank you, I yield.
Finance Officer Pauline Sumption.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to tag on to a little bit of what Joel said about the state statute prior to 2009. The statute at the time actually required all cities over 50,000 to have that runoff election if somebody didn't get 50% plus one. At that time, that was Rapid City. We were the only city required to have a runoff election prior to 2009 because at the time Sioux Falls was home rule, so they didn't have to follow it. So that's one of the reasons why they changed it.
Darla Drew.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a comment on my part. I guess I don't have a question for anyone. But this runoff idea also takes an extreme toll on the people that have to do this. I mean, you've gone up to the election, then you have to have a runoff. It's a real cost to them financially and emotionally. They have 3 more weeks to run, 3 more weeks to worry, and believe me, running for office, and even at the council level, is very stressful. So I would say that I think this is a good thing for the council people as well. I heard people in Ward 3 that said to me, oh, we're just waiting for the runoff. That's when they're going to really spend the money. That's, they're waiting because they just know there's going to be a runoff. And I think that's a bad precedent to actually think about it that way too, that there's always going to be a runoff. If you have more than 3 or, 2 candidates, 3, 4, whatever it is. So then people are thinking, well, then we'll make our decision. So I think that just by putting an actual date on this thing and saying it's over, you've got to get out and vote now. Don't wait. There's not going to be a runoff. Get out and vote. Make your voice heard. And let's get these candidates into the council, and they don't have to spend more, and they don't have to worry anymore. They know what's going on. Thank you.
Richie Nordstrom.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Mayor. I get into the wonky part of this whole thing, and the data. What's very interesting on this, and there's a couple of asterisks behind my numbers to present to you, but it is essentially all the data that came in from the county commission. Some of those elections included Hill City in those total counts. So with the asterisk behind it, it still only amounted to a little over 16% as an average over the last 10 years. But the trend line is going down each and every time. And when it gets into the runoffs, that number is even going down quicker. So that's another reason why we need to do the saving the taxpayers and additional funding, because the last 4 elections that we did have a runoff in, the winner, the top vote getter in those 4 elections, runoffs, over the last 10 years, did win that final runoff. So there was no changes in that vote tally. But again, the number that is really worrisome for me is the trend line that is continually going down. It's even happening on the national level as well. And when we start seeing it statewide, South Dakota, that number is also going down. So it is an area of concern. And it isn't just because we're eliminating a potential of people having an opportunity to vote. They've got that right now, but they're not using it. So that's another worry, another conversation. So thank you, Mayor. I yield.
Thank you. John Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was going to make an amendment to this, but I'm not going to waste my time trying to make one because I know it won't pass. So I just want to say a few things on this. I've heard people that say that they want to get more people out to vote. I don't think this is really necessarily the way to do it. I think we may disenfranchise a few people that are thinking, you know, why should I go out and vote? Because now the candidate that's in office right now has, like some people have said to me, will have an undue advantage just because of name recognition. It's going to be a hard hurdle to get over. We're always talking about getting more people to run for city council. You know, that can be difficult. I know that it can be difficult to run a runoff. I think I've done 4 of them in my political career and not lost any, I don't think. I don't know, I'd have to look at that. But, you know, it is difficult, and that's part of politics. It shouldn't be too easy. When it becomes too easy, then, you know, you're just getting all the same people with all the same views, and you're passing everything like this is going to pass tonight with really much real debate on it. It does concern me. It does really concern me that this is going to, like I said, disenfranchise more people. I talk to people all the time that say, well, what's the reason for me to vote? Why should I go out and vote? Nothing ever changes. You know, people on this dais for the last 20 years have all been campaigning on how we're going to go out and fix the infrastructure, and it's not getting any better, it's getting worse. So, you know, I mean, it just bothers me. You know, it bothers me, so I'm going to vent here for just 1 second and vote no on this and be the only no vote like many times on this dais. So, anyway, thank you.
Okay, thank you. The motion is for approval. All in favor of approval, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Any noes?
No.
Speak up. All right,
No.
motion passes with 1 no. Item 44. First reading, ordinance 6342, and ordinance amending section 17.06 of chapter 17 of the Rapid City Municipal Code. A request by Dream Design International for Eileen and Edward Eller for a rezoning request from General Agricultural District to Low Density Residential District for property generally described as being located west of the current terminus of West Minnesota Street, east of Mount Rushmore Road. Motion to approve by Modrich, second by Roberts. All in favor of that motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item 45, first reading ordinance 6343, an ordinance amending section 17.06 of chapter 17 of the Rapid City Municipal Code, a request by Brian Watland for Western Dakota Technical College for a rezoning request from low-density residential district to public district for property generally described as being located east of Mickelson Drive, west of, is that Valley Drive or Valley, is that spelled correctly?
No, it's supposed to be
Valley Drive, and north of Homestead Street. Motion to approve Nordstrom, second by Drury. All in favor of approval say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item 46, bless you. Item 46, first reading ordinance 6344 and ordinance amending section 17.06 of chapter 17 of the Rapid City Municipal Code. A request by Dream Design International for Yasmin Dream LLC for a rezoning request from General Agricultural District to Medium Density Residential District for property generally described as being located east of Elk Vale Road. Motion to approve by Drew, second by Nordstrom. All in favor of approval, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Now we'll go on to the Public Works Committee item, and we'll go to the Public Works Committee Chair, John Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Authorize staff to advertise for bids project number 2491, CIP number 51225, City Hall Administration Center renovation, and I recommend approval.
Second by Chad Lewis. All in favor of approval, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries with one no from Mr. Evans. On to community development items, number 48. A request by Fisk Land Surveying and Consulting Engineers for Maghermore. Maghermore. Who knows how to say this? Huh? Maghermore. LLC for a preliminary subdivision plan for proposed lots 1 to 23 of Darlington Estates Subdivision Number 2, generally described as being located at the current southern terminus of Kimberwick Road. And the recommendation from committee is to approve with stipulations. Okay, we had Drew making the motion, second by Drury. All in favor of approval with stipulations, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Item 50, a request by Davis Engineering for Rube Family Trust for a preliminary subdivision plan for proposed lots 8A and 8B of Hillsview subdivision, generally described as being located at 1171 Valley Drive, and the recommendation is to approve with stipulations. Motion to approve with stipulations by Lewis. Second by Drury. Okay, we'll go backwards. For item 50, we have a motion and a second to approve with stipulations. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Sure? Yes. No, I'm not sure.
From Maghermore to down here.
No, I remember reading Eileen and Edward Eller. Oh, no wonder. Okay, you're right this time. This once. Okay, item 49, my apologies. A request by Dream Design International for Eileen and Edward Eller for a preliminary subdivision plan for proposed lots 1 through 37 of Block 1 of Scotland Hills subdivision, generally described as being located west of the current terminus of West Minnesota Street, east of Mount Rushmore Road, and the recommendation is to approve with stipulations.
Second.
Motion by Modrich and a second by Armstrong to approve with stipulations. All in favor of that motion say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Now going down to bid awards, item 51. Reject all bids for West Main and Jackson Boulevard panel repair project, project number 19-2513, CPI number 50445, opened on July 30th, 2019, and reconsider project at a later date. Did I say CPI? Duly noted. We have a motion to approve by Drury. That's the motion is to reject. Second by Drew. And we'll go to Laura Armstrong.
Thank you. May I direct a question to Mr. Tech?
Yes.
Mr. Tech, why are we doing this? Because I'm on that corner. That gets a lot of traffic.
The bids came in about 50% higher than anticipated. Due to the extreme wet weather we've had, we've certainly attracting a contractor to be able to get this work done in a timely fashion is reflected in the bid price. Our street department has been keeping that intersection serviceable. It's not in the best shape, but they'll continue to do so. Next year, Omaha Street's going to be rebuilt, and then the year after that, this intersection then will be rebuilt. So this project was just a stopgap project to try to improve some of the rides, some of the major pavement failures there, but we'll continue to make do with what we have until that project comes forward to rebuild this intersection.
Okay, thank you for explaining that.
You're welcome.
I yield.
Okay, motion on the floor is to reject all the bids. All in favor of that motion, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Public hearing items 52 through 57. We have no speaker requests, so no public hearing or no public comment. Consent public hearing items 52 through 57. We'll go to Darla Drew.
I ask to be recused from item number 56 as I'm president of Backroom Productions.
Okay. So these are consent items. Is there a motion from the council?
Mr. Mayor.
John Roberts.
Thank you. I want to recuse myself from 53 and 54.
Okay. Any other action from the council on these consent items? Okay, we have a motion to approve the items from Drury, second from Armstrong. All in favor of that motion, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes, and Alderman Roberts abstains from 53 and 54, and Alderwoman Darla Drew abstains from item 56. Down to item 58, the bill list, and we'll go to Finance Officer Pauline Sumption.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There are no additions to the bill list, so the total is that which is attached at $9,624,005.08.
Motion to approve Lewis, second by Drew. All in favor of approval, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Motion to adjourn by Roberts and second by Armstrong, and all the people said aye. All right, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.